Today we're going to begin a discussion of chapter 14 in our Anatomy and Physiology textbook, and it's about the autonomic nervous system. This is a really interesting chapter about the involuntary motor divisions of your nervous system. So this chapter is short, relatively speaking, but it's a really important chapter to pay attention to because many of the drugs used in medicine are actually drugs that control the function, either activating or inhibiting the receptors for the neurotransmitters of this division. So this division covers control of organs throughout your thoracic and abdominal cavity, and it turns out that many of the organs have unique receptors so that we can target drugs to each organ, either activating or inhibiting receptors. So that's a pretty interesting field of medicine. So what are we talking about? Visceral nervous system or autonomic nervous system. It innervates smooth muscles, heart muscle, and glands, things that you have no knowledge of, no control over. And it's all about maintaining homeostasis. So we'll see, we're going to take a closer look at all the functions of the autonomic nervous system as we go through. There's a familiar schematic diagram of the nervous system we looked at the very beginning of chapter 11. I'm just homing in on part of the peripheral nervous system, part of the motor divisions particularly. The autonomic nervous system has the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division, two antagonistic or opposite functioning divisions. Comparing it to the somatic motor division, the skeletal muscle motor neurons, like the somatic motor division, skeletal muscles, autonomic motor divisions, control your heart, smooth muscle, and glands. The somatic motor neurons go directly from the spinal cord right to the skeletal muscles, one neuron per pathway. In the autonomic nervous system, always pairs. There's a ganglion, or they connect, or a synapse. So the first neuron in the pair is called the preganglionic neuron, and its cell bodies are in the spinal cord or the brain stem, so in the central nervous system. The postganglionic neurons emerge from the ganglia, that's where their bodies are, and they travel out to the target organs, and their terminals innervate the target organs. The neurotransmitters, well, we know that in the somatic division, the neuromuscular junctions use acetylcholine. There's two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, but both types of ganglia use acetylcholine. In other words, the preganglionic neurons all release acetylcholine, but the sympathetic nervous system, the postganglionic neurons release norepinephrine on the target organs, and the parasympathetic division releases acetylcholine onto the effectors. So this is just a listing out of the things we just talked about for the most part. The autonomic motor system has pairs of neurons in each pathway. The effectors are cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Where are the preganglionic neuron cell bodies in the central nervous system? This is unique. The sympathetic division has its cell bodies in the thoracolumbar spinal cord, the lateral horns of the gray matter of the spinal cord. The preganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic division are in the brainstem and in the sacral region around near the spinal cord. So, generally speaking, the parasympathetic nervous system is a rest and digest system. It's called a maintenance function overseer. The sympathetic nervous system makes the changes that occur during exercise or activity. The two divisions innervate the same organs, typically with opposite effects. They're antagonistic divisions. Dynamic antagonism describes the function of the two autonomic divisions, and between them, being able to do the opposite things, we can precisely control homeostatically the function of all these organs. So here's a schematic diagram to kind of look at the layout of the autonomic nervous system divisions. The somatic division that we've already talked about, has motor neurons of skeletal muscles in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, travel right to the skeletal muscles and release acetylcholine. The sympathetic preganglionic neurons arise in the lateral horn of the spinal cord, travel to nearby ganglia, and release acetylcholine into the ganglia. Or this would be a cluster of a whole bunch of postganglionic neuron cell bodies, and the postganglionic neurons travel all the rest of the way to the target organs and release norepinephrine. So that's the general scheme of the sympathetic nervous system. There is a population of preganglionic neurons, sympathetic neurons, that innervate not ganglionic, postganglionic neurons, but instead gland cells. The adrenal medulla, the inner part of the adrenal glands, release epinephrine and norepinephrine into the blood when we activate the sympathetic nervous system by exercising. So the neurotransmitters are going to go right into the blood and affect all of the target organs. The parasympathetic division has preganglionic cell bodies that lie in the brainstem, in the sacral region, near the spinal cord, long preganglionic axons that travel to the target organs and release acetylcholine into the ganglia. And these ganglia right on the target organs then contain very short postganglionic neurons that release acetylcholine onto the effector organs. So this is just saying in words what we just observed. Some sympathetic neurons activate the adrenal medulla, and those cells, those gland cells, release epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline into the blood. That's called a diffuse response, as opposed to a discrete neuron by neuron control of organs. All right, the parasympathetic division, how shall we generalize about its function? It's called the rest and digest division sometimes. It promotes digestion of food, absorption of the nutrients, and then storage of the nutrients for later. So it's a maintenance division. Also, elimination of wastes is a maintenance function. It uses very little energy in the process for all these activities. The minimal amount of energy is consumed. So let's take a look at a couple of things that happen when the parasympathetic nervous system has hold of the body. When you're relaxing after a meal, typically. Blood pressure and heart rate, respiration are lower. GI tract is at full bore. You're digesting. It activates all the organs of digestion. It's responsible for that. And the secretion, movement, muscular movement. The storage of nutrients. Glucose is stored as glycogen in the liver and as fat. Glucose is easily converted to fatty acids and then stored as triglycerides. Fatty acids that you consume in your diet are stored also as fat in your adipose tissue. Amino acids coming in from the protein in your diet. This system promotes protein synthesis, storing away those amino acids, building. Also, it turns out that parasympathetic nervous system constricts your pupils and accommodates your lenses. It's all about sharp vision, close-up vision for doing detailed tasks when you're at your leisure. The sympathetic nervous system is the exercise division, or sometimes called the fight or flight division. I prefer using the exercise moniker because if you just call it the fight or flight division, it tends to create the impression that it's only activated in rare instances of dire emergencies, when in fact it's activated every single time you do virtually any activity, as well as other situations. Right? If you become excited by something, or embarrassed, angry, sympathetic nervous system is turned on. So what happens? Well, if you look at the cardiovascular system, the heart and blood vessels, the heart rate increases and the heart pumps harder. And so more blood is pumped out by the heart. Blood flow in the entire body is increased. That way we can deliver more oxygen and fuels to the muscles and parts of the body that are important during exercise. It also redirects blood flow from the intestines and stomach, the gastrointestinal system, the kidneys, the skin, until the temperature starts to rise. All those organs, we're going to take away blood flow from them and deliver it to the muscles. You're going to have that dry mouth effect. You're going to have cold, sweaty skin. There's sweat going to be coming out. Your pupils tend to dilate. The bronchioles, or bronchi, the airways in your lungs dilate. Smooth muscle relaxes. The whole idea is to be able to pump in a lot more air to bring in more oxygen to deliver to your working muscles and your brain, your heart. The sympathetic nervous system provides not only the blood flow for exercise, but the fuels for ATP production. So with the sympathetic division, we're going to release those raw materials back out from storage. The liver will release glucose into the blood. Adipose tissue will release fatty acids back out into the blood. And now the muscles have a couple of wonderful sources in your heart and your nervous system for ATP production. Here's a schematic diagram showing the parasympathetic nervous system a little differently. Here we can see the origin of the preganglionic neurons in the brainstem and down in the sacral region. Long preganglionic axons, ganglia at the target organs, and short postganglionic neurons. So here's a listing out of maybe some of the major organs affected by the parasympathetic division. 90% of the fibers of the parasympathetic division are carried in cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. I've been harping on that for a while, so hopefully that's pretty familiar by now. So because the origin of the preganglionic neurons is in the cranial and sacral region, it's called the craniosacral division. Oculomotor nerve and facial nerve and glossopharyngeal nerves also carry parasympathetic fibers. And here's another schematic diagram showing a little bit more detail. All right, let's look at the sympathetic division. The sympathetic division has its preganglionic neurons in the lateral horn of the thoracolumbar spinal cord. Thorax, lumbar region, thoracic region, lumbar region. They synapse close to the spinal column in ganglia, from which arise the postganglionic neurons, and they travel the longer distance to all the target or effector organs. So that's kind of a schematic of the sympathetic nervous system. Interestingly, the adrenal medulla is innervated directly by a population of preganglionic neurons. Unfortunately, this box that says adrenal medulla was supposed to land over here in this little gap, and I don't know how it somehow leapt to the left. It's feeling a little frisky. The thoracolumbar division, because of the origin of those neurons. And here's just some listing out of all those facts in a summary table. Your authors provide these wonderful summary tables that you can use to study from. So join me next time as we continue to look at the actual functions and a little bit more about the detailed layout of the sympathetic nervous system particularly.